about the total transformation of America. Interesting that other world leaders have said the same thing. Mikhail Gorbachev in '87. We are moving towards a new world order, the world of communism. We shall never turn off that road. National Socialism will use its own revolution for establishing of a new world order. That was Adolf Hitler. Here's another favorite of mine. We must establish a new world order based on justice, on equity, and on peace. That's Fidel Castro. What is this transformation, this new world order? What is this agenda? The philosophical foundation is Marxist, progressive, socialism, all the isms. The isms are all alike, that they advocate the ownership and control of property, industry, economic production, all natural resources by the government, not by individual ownership, whose aim is suppressing initiative as well as individualism. The agenda is really the Communist Manifesto for the 21st century, and it is what we have replaced our Constitution with. In '94, multi-billionaire David Rockefeller said, "We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with an idea." He said, we came up with an idea. That pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. The real enemy then is humanity itself. He also, in his 2002 memoir, said, some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists, and of us conspiring with others around the world to build a more intricate global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty and I am proud of it. Yeah. The opposite of the agenda is our Constitution and Declaration of Independence, what made America exceptional. It is our timeless statement of inherent rights, the proper purpose of government, and the limits on political authority. America's principles have created a prosperous and just nation, unlike any other in history, and yet we are turning our country into just another socialist European country. Socialism is not about redistributing wealth. Because why would very rich men push to do so? No. It's because socialism is about consolidating the wealth into the hands of people like David Rockefeller and one of my favorites, George Soros, who last year, in the middle of our economic crisis, made another $1 billion on what he does. At the same time, funding numerous organizations to destroy America. Another one is Al Gore. He made an estimated $100 million from the sale of his current TV to pan-Arab broadcaster Al Jazeera. An enemy of ours that has no love for America, and now we're going to have them broadcasting in our country. Gore is now worth more than $300 million since he left the White House. My. The green really does make you rich. All made from Agenda 21 implementation and his saying that man causes global warming. What has been the consequences to the loyal, law-abiding, tax-paying, hard-working Americans? For we, the little people, are paying the price. What other prices are we paying in my county? As I talked about, if Precision Pine would still be there, we would have generated in these last so many years $240 million to our economy. We have attack on our coal plants now, and part of Navajo County is the reservation, the Navajo Reservation. The attack on the Navajo generating plant, that's 60% of the reservation's income. What are those people going to do? Not to mention what it is for CPA, or CAP. No, did I say it right? Very good, okay. And we have the Cholla Power Plant in Joe City. And that, they almost employ 300 people. We can't afford anymore to be. Another part of this global setting up and creating this new world order has been these international free trade agreements. They're not free. When they're just recently they were renewing the NAFTA agreement with the Mexican tomato growers. There were American tomato growers begging that when the suspension plan was rewritten that there were protections put in there for the American growers. And do you think anybody would help them? No, our Arizona delegations were on the side of the importers from Mexico. What are we thinking? We're destroying ourselves just a bit at a time. Now, give me a minute to get organized again and see if I can catch up. What I wanted to,
Ms. Allen, we have about 2 more minutes.
2 minutes? Thank you very much. Okay. Julian Simon, Maurice Strong of the UN said, "We may get to the point where the only way of saving the world's environment will be for industrial civilization to collapse and the total introduction of socialism." Al Gore said, "America in particular needs to redefine its relationship with the earth. Specifically, the growth of human population must be reduced. Severe controls must be placed upon industry, and a global government must impose a single shared goal as the central organizing principle for every institution in society. That shared goal is saving the global environment." Now, that's the Marxist philosophy, but let's talk about the American philosophy. Here's the definition of inalienable rights. Life is a gift from God, but life cannot maintain itself alone. That gift did not come from government, me being born, thanks to my parents and to God. The Creator of life has entrusted us with the responsibility of preserving, developing, and protecting it. He has provided us with a collection of marvelous faculties, and He has put us in the midst of a variety of natural resources. By the application of our faculties to these natural resources, we convert them into products and use them. Life, faculties, production, in other words, individuality, liberty, property, this is men. That's Frederick Bastiat. Dr. Julian Simon said, "A free people do not exhaust resources, they create them." Dr. Simon was a champion of the human and saying how what the environment needs is us to protect it. And through our ingenuity and our love for the property that we own, we create and we refine it and we figure out ways to stretch it. Never in the world did my brother want to go out and cut down every tree. He was also interested in the forest to continue to regenerate. We've come to a point now, committee, we have to decide who we are. Are we going to continue to stand up for the American principles that made us great? Are we going to start learning what those principles are, relearning them? Are we going to stand up against the universities that teach these constant other isms to the young people and refuse to teach Americanism? Are we going to start calling out our elected officials who pledge allegiance to the flag, raise their arm that they are going to defend the Constitution of the United States, and go to work to destroy it by using these principles? Contrary to America and the constitutional republic that we set up. We're very close to losing it. I would even say, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll end with this last quote. This is Stanislaw Myslin, a Russian writer. This is an article in Pravda.
Yeah.
Do you think they might know and recognize Marxism? America's rapid descent into Marxism. It must be said that like the breaking of a great dam, the American descent to Marxism is happening with breathtaking speed against the backdrop of a passive, hapless sheeple. Excuse me, dear reader, I meant people. His last sentence reads, "The proud American will go down into his slavery without a fight, beating his chest and proclaiming to the world how free he really is. The world will only snicker." Well, ladies and gentlemen, as long as I live, I have 19 grandchildren. I want them to have what I remember 50 years ago, living in Heber, when those log trucks were running. And people had the right to live where they wanted to live and do what they wanted to do and create something for their families. We have lost that because of the planners who think they know best for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Supervisor Allen. That was a very, very, very inspiring presentation. And quoting people like Bastiat, these are the heroes and champions of freedom, and you truly are a proud new generation of champions of freedom in the United States. I have a question for you, and it has to do with solutions.
Yes.
And I guess my One of the biggest protections, I believe, and most important aspects of that citizens have brought to defend economic liberty and personal liberty in Arizona kind of slipped under the radar nationally, and it was in the wake of the Kelo versus New London decision where they took where the Supreme Court decided that it was legal for the United States to take or for government agencies to take private property and give it from one to redistribute to another without just compensation. We passed in 2006 Prop 207 that said not only are we going to defend against those overreaches, but to a point of where if the government regulates a takings, it's a regulatory takings, not an actual taking, but regulates you into poverty, you are owed just compensation. Have we considered utilizing that regulatory takings protection that was enshrined by the voters overwhelmingly passed in 2006 and using that as a stalwart shield against radical environmental policies and leftist policies brought down by various and sundry governments?
We need to, part of the solution is reestablishing our founding principles. And that's one thing. Property rights must be secured or liberty cannot exist, as John Adams said. I mean, your property, if the government can just take it at its will, regardless of any other, coming up with all these issues that the end justifies the means, we have to have those protections, and you as the legislature need to be sure those are in place, and local governments like myself, to remember we have that in place and be sure we use it if we need to protect somebody's property.
Thank you.
Senator, it's always a thrill and a pleasure. Thank you. I appreciate your testimony. Flagstaff has a rich history of logging, very, very similar to Navajo County. And matter of fact, our Sky Dome, I believe, is the largest woods dome in the world. And it's impressive if any of you haven't had the opportunity to walk inside. Who controls the largest amount of land in Arizona?
The federal government.
Yeah. And I think that's...
By the way, is another issue that really they never should.
Right.
That was not the philosophical foundation at all. They did not want the federal government to be a landowner. They were leaving one landowner already that was overpowering their rights to be able to have private property.
And can you describe for a second what stump fees are?
Stump fees? Well, that's what they...
Or how they were used in the past.
Well, they were used to, are you talking about in the timber sales? They would pay the stumpage fee within the timber sales. And when I referred to the $1 million that one year I knew went back to the county, that's because the county does not have a lot of private property. In my county, we have like 13% private property. The rest is owned by either the reservation, well, it's still owned by the federal government, all of it. And so in lieu of the fact that we have no property tax to fund our schools, some of these fees, then 25% came back to the rural areas.
And Gila County, 4% of their land is in private hands. Coconut County, 12% of their land. So yeah, it's pretty terrible. Something that Mr. Garcetti with Cattleman brought up to me recently was watersheds. That, for example, Flagstaff, being so overgrown with trees, that's really reducing the amount of water that makes it down into the lower lands. Do you remember offhand how much water, for example, a cottonwood tree drinks per day?
I'm not sure about cottonwood, but I know that a mature ponderosa pine will take 200 gallons a day.
I think.
And if we want to restore our watersheds, we need to thin out our forests for a vast amount of reasons. And funny, after the Roto-Chesky fire, what happens is flooding dangers. When we have those big fires, there's no trees or vegetation to catch it when the rains come. But Roosevelt Lake at that time was almost empty. I mean, it was pitiful looking. And after the Chesky fire, and we had a lot of flooding, but the summer monsoon came, and within a matter of days, that lake was full. Now, it was sooty, bad water, but that just shows you, how much the vegetation takes.
And would you characterize a forest as a crop?
Well, it's a huge kind of, I like to look at it as kind of like a garden, but it's huge, and so it's very hard to thin it in the way that you do your own garden. You know, I try to grow a garden every summer, and it's kind of pitiful, but you have to thin it, and you have to take care of it. And I believe that we do, well, to make it healthy, we've got to harvest those trees. We do, and we've now proven the consequences of pulling out the timber industry all over the West, what has happened to our forests. The beetles have just taken them over.
My piece of land that I purchased is 10 acres, and when I bought it, instead of having approximately 150 trees on it, it had 8,000 trees on it. And I've now taken out about 3,000 trees. I'm a tree hugger. I hug them right before I cut them down. So if any of you don't know this, one of the things that kills trees, these bark beetles, it's because there's so much density, there's so much competition for light and water that they can't develop enough sap. And so when the bark beetle starts boring in, normally it would push the beetle out with the sap, and because the trees are stressed, about 2 weeks later they're dead. And 100, 200-year-old trees gone pretty quickly. You mentioned Navajo Generating Station. That's a big one on my radar. Boy, if that station closes, 40-year-old station, the EP wants us to put about $1 billion into it, not to improve the air quality, but to improve something called haze. But if you look at prevailing winds do not blow any of the smoke from that station to the Grand Canyon. So that's the haze that you see in the Grand Canyon come from two sources. One, as a firefighter, I know because I was invited lots of times to go up there and do burns around the Grand Canyon. And when they burn off the timber and all the fuel on the floor, that just fills the canyon with smoke. But the EPA doesn't care about that because it's another federal organization doing the burning. But where do you think the other haze comes from?
Well, I was reading an interesting article last night when I was preparing for this, and we just don't understand how great actually our Earth system is contained, the biosphere. It's pretty wonderful, but you know, air circulates. And we get air from China and other third world countries that are not cleaning their air like we're happy to. In fact, the air circulates all the way around the Earth within 2 weeks. And yet, you think about the volcanoes that go off and what they spew into the atmosphere, and that atmosphere can clean it up pretty darn good. It is just amazing to me, but again, we've gone overboard. We're overboard. The amount of money, these companies have already put all kinds of money into their system. It's a war on coal. Don't be mistaken. The game is. And so people are lining up buying all this money into natural gas. So they're already, we destroy one industry so people can take that money and push it up and consolidate that wealth up there as we're pushing everybody down. And that's because we're not respecting these businesses, and government needs to stay out of as much as they can.
Are you fracking around with us?
Oh, well, you know, we do have sand up. We sell fracking sand in Navajo County, so.
And by the way, audience, please refrain from laughing and clapping. But here in Arizona, if you do have your Colt 45, feel free to shoot it in the air. One last thing. I know I'm hogging the mic right now, and I apologize. But I'm here all day. Try the shrimp.
Don't get me started on the Second Amendment.
But the last thing I just wanted to mention is you are a defender of liberty, and I appreciate that. You made a comment about losing our liberty. Our liberty is not lost overnight. It's not lost in a week or a month. It's lost a little tiny bit at a time. And unless we're vigilant,
it's going fast.
Always vigilant, we'll wake up and that liberty will be gone. Thank you very much for your testimony, and you're right, you're spot on. Thank you.
We've got to start calling it like it is.
Just Very quickly, Supervisor.
No, I'm Joel.
Madam
That's
Chair,
Tom over there
Supervisor,
by the door.
what is the expected job loss if the Navajo generating station gets shut down? What is the, do we have a new estimate?
I heard it back there.
1,000.
And for the choice, and then there's the Coronado plant. I don't know what they'll do over in Springerville, but, and Four Corners and,
Prices, Madam Chair, and Supervisor, if the price of water increases based on the impacts, the economic impacts of the generating stations shut down, what about farmers who are in my district right now, my legislative district, who are right now, you know, just trying to make a living and scraping and striving for a living, and if their costs increase, what would happen to
Mr.
Well, we're
President,
gonna
that
have
might
a-
be a better question for Mark.
that's what I was gonna say, we're gonna have a speaker on that. Obviously, the cost will go up, but here's what you have to understand. Electric costs, electricity rates and cost will go up all over the state. It's just not gonna affect my area where I live. I don't know about any of you, but I'm old now and I'm getting towards the time when I'm gonna have to live on a, you know, just a certain kind of income. And my electric bill's horrible. And if it keeps going up and we get to the point where our electric bill and our gas bill, our gas to get around in our cars, I don't know how anybody's gonna feed themselves. Coal is a great, cheap energy, and we should not be destroying these plants until we at least have something as cheap already built. But where are we gonna get the billions of dollars to build all this new infrastructure, ladies and gentlemen, when we are 16 trillion in debt?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Allen, and by the way, we're not related. But it wouldn't
I
be-
wish we were.
Your niece works for me, so I.
Oh, yeah, I see, we're almost on.
Not all environmental law has been a boondoggle for us, has it? You know,
Has been a,
a
now say.
boondoggle, like the Clean Water and Air Act
Oh,
of the
there's-
70s. You know, I mean, I grew up back east where the Hudson River, I mean, if you wanted to kill your dog, you just let him go swim in it. I mean, it was, you know, just awful, and you know, water quality was horrible, air quality, we had a well on our property, you constantly have to have it tested. And the Clean Water and Air Act did some very good things, and yet now we're faced with the track record of a few good things that have come out of some laws that we needed. They've extrapolated it out into a lifestyle and a property rights issue. And I'm wondering, you know, would you expand on the idea of where property rights should take place in these issues where they want to go now?
Well, the first thing I would say, though, is that constitutionally, we didn't do it correctly. And it should have been left up to the states. It was not a
Yes.
enumerated power of the federal
Yes.
government. And if we'd have
That
left it up to the
amendment.
states, if we'd left it up to the states, it's closer to home, closer where you have a voice, where we can be sure to protect those individual rights that need to be protected. At the same time, clean it up and use the best technology that we can to do that. I'm not against those things, but it has been used by those who want to bring about a new world order, those who want to bring about a socialist government because they have all kinds of reasons. I think the biggest reason is money and power that people use it for. They can find a way that they can be the winner in a government decision while everybody else is a loser. But at any rate, we did it wrong, and we went back to the Supreme Court. Who do you think's we've been putting people on the Supreme Court who are really progressive socialists? They can interpret that Constitution the way they want. They don't go back to the original founders' intent. And most lawyers don't even study the Constitution to begin with, much less what any of the founders said about it. They study constitutional law that has been perverted over the years. Anyway, that's off on a tangent. But the thing is, it has to come back, and we have to do it right, and it needs to be done by the states, locally, by local governments, so it can be done to protect people's property as well as the health and safety and welfare of the people.
But,
I'm sorry.
Supervisor,
Yeah.
and that decision then has to be taken in light of property rights. In other words,
Yes.
when you go down to the local level, you're then pushing towards property rights. And the reason I bring it up, I remember seeing whales when I was a kid. My father and I were sailing around, and I says, yeah, you know, the whaling's just about destroyed them. And my father laughs, and he goes, do you know why they never have to protect cattle? He goes, because people own them. He says, if you want to save the whales, give them to somebody. And because people protect their property right interests. Property rights is the greatest protector of the environment we can know of.
Oh, you're so right.
And so I know that we talk about the local level and stuff like that, but I think the final arbiter of the good of the planet comes down to the fact that we live here and we own it. And if we live here and we own it, we will take good care of it. But if we have the government gobbling up more and more of our rights, especially property rights, and not defending our property rights in court, i.e. the federal courts or whatever, that the environment is actually going to decline, not improve. So,
Absolutely right. And after those fires, after it was the locals that started cleaning up on their properties, and their property recovered so much faster. With the help of their neighbors, they replanted. There was 300 homes burned in the Rodeo Chetasky fire. That property has recovered so much better. Trees have been replanted, and yes, that's exactly the solution. Thank you.
We're going to have to move on to the next speaker. One question.
Thank you.
This is going to be good.
Say that perhaps Representative Allen should have talked to Representative Carter about adding whales to the service animal.
oh, sounds fishy.
Supervisor Allen, thank you for coming, and I do feel the pain and the anger about the timber industry declining, the paper industry declining, all the rest of that, and I think that that is a bad thing to have happened. We do want to be able to have our paper industry and timber industry. However, from my research, the paper industry has been declining in large part because of the lack of demand for the paper products that's gone down since newspapers and books have gone online. There's a lot less demand for paper that way. The timber industry has suffered a great deal from foreign competition, particularly in Canada. There's been less demand, particularly recently, when the housing industry is declining. So there's a lot of different complex elements that are causing decline. And I know that the coal industry and the timber industry were also very large, cash-heavy, powerful, centralized businesses. But they went down also, and I don't think it was because other centralized, powerful, cash-filled industries were taking them down. There are forces in the economy that are really difficult for us to grapple with, and sometimes it's just terrible when you see what it's doing to people on an everyday level. The thing I want to get at, and the question I want to ask you is sort of along the lines of what Representative Allen was saying. Isn't there...
Comment on that,
Okay.
and then you ask me
Okay,
the
sure.
question. If government would get out of businesses so that businesses can deal with the economic pressures that are coming just naturally from being in business, they could survive better. The paper mill could survive if it wasn't for free trade agreements with China, where they have driven up the recyclable paper and then sell the paper back here cheap. These free trade agreements have really socked our American businesses. Again, that is our government messing in the natural market and what needs to happen and not protecting American businesses.
Supervisor Allen, I agree with you on that. I think that's a serious problem. We should work together.
Yeah,
I like
thank
working together with people and those types of things.
Sure, we're going to have to move on.
But no, I had one question.
Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Is there any case in which you think the federal regulations can be good? Because I've been looking back at it. I'm looking back, for example, at another powerful industry, the lead paint industry.
Oh, God.
And in 1922, it was first banned in Europe when it was discovered that it was a neurotoxin and incredibly dangerous, particularly to kids who were licking paint and developing forms of mental retardation. It took 56 years beyond that date, when it was left to the states and the states did not ban it, until the EPA and the CPSC banned it in 1978. And that's something in which Richard Nixon, creating the EPA, the Clean Air Act, and the Clean Water Act, put in place what needed to be done so the federal government finally got rid of something that was a proven neurotoxin to kids. Now, do you think that the lead paint industry, because it provided plenty of jobs, and they lost plenty of jobs when that was banned, And the price went up when you had to get paint that would cover it, and there still isn't paint that covers as well as lead paint. I know that. Do you think we should not have banned lead paint, and the federal government had no role in that, or do you think just the state should have been allowed to do it, even though they didn't do it for 56 years?
Of course, you're asking a question that obviously I would agree that we need to regulate the lead paint. Education is very important, and I believe that eventually it would have been without the government having to step in. The states, as they got more and more educated on this issue, and this issue was brought before the states as a problem, and the education about this particular issue. You know, freedom means that we're not going to live in a perfect society, that there's going to be bad things that are going to happen. And we have to learn from that, and that's what we learn from. One example, uranium mining. We certainly have learned how to do it correctly now, where we don't pollute the water and have the sicknesses that we had, 60 years ago. We have learned. And I still believe that free people will learn these lessons, and they will correct them, and they can do it in a way that they can protect individual rights as well as protecting the public. But we've gone way too far. We've gone way too far. We are now stymied. We are surrounded by thousands of chains just holding us down. We've got a great potential in Navajo County of having potash. Thank heavens it's on state and private land, because maybe we'll have a chance of having it. You see, the Resolution mines closed down because they can't get the 1,200 acres from the federal government. Dealing with the federal government is beyond a nightmare. But at any rate, they can't get investment money. They're searching for investment money. So that's a problem out there. Our economy, our country is in such a mess economically, people do not want to invest. And where are they looking for those dollars? China, India, other countries that have more investment money than we do now. We've got to stop. We've got to go back to our founding principles. That's the only answer.
Madam Chair, can I ask one really quick one?
We're going to have to move on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a supervisor. Keep order, please. We have Supervisor for District 3 from Greenlee County, Mr. Robert Corbell. Welcome, Mr. Corbell. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, committee, and for letting me speak here. Let me put this on. My name is Robert Corbell. I am the current elected supervisor in Greenlee County, Arizona, District 3. I'm not speaking for my full board. I'd like to get more involved in this, but I'm speaking on my own behalf. I've been asked to speak on the topic of Agenda 21 and its adverse effects in Greenlee County. First, let me thank you for having me here today. Agenda 21 is destroying the state of Arizona and all the counties within its borders. I have lived in Greenlee County for 55 years. I was born and raised there. During my lifetime, I have witnessed a viable mining, ranching, and farming community that has been regulated so heavily that the residents are unable to just sustain their traditional business without grants and subsidies based on sustainable development. I love Greenlee County, and I believe it's the best place on earth. I cannot stand by and watch what I cherish and love so dearly be destroyed by a diabolical plan that is manipulating the population into some United Nations agenda that it is self-unsustainable if you have a constitution and a free market system. There's no question that Agenda 21 is in Greenlee County. The people of Greenlee County are not farming, ranching, logging, owning private property, or their kids being educated without Agenda 21 being forced upon them. Some officials and residents of Greenlee County are taking grants and subsidies from non-government organizations as well as federal government to implement tax-funded projects about which voters have no say. These grants and subsidies come with strings. You play the game or you lose the money. These strings have become a complete strangulation of our liberties. Agenda 21 advocates an end to national sovereignty, abolition of private property, restructure of the family unit, increasing limitations and restrictions on mobility and individual opportunities, and abandonment of the constitutional protection of our inalienable rights as as described in the Declaration of Independence. I will cover some topics here today that have deep roots in freedom and liberty that have been deliberately and systematically regulated into a fascist and communistic collective soft takeover of the last 25 years under the illusion of sustainability and environmentalism. These actions and programs affect the health, safety, welfare, and prosperity of the people. One of the things in Agenda 21 that really strikes me when you read it real good is that the property rights of the people are going to have to be surrendered to the collective. To me, that's socialism. I'm going to go on here about water rights, along with the federal government taking vested water rights. Water usage is being strictly monitored by what used to be a deeded property right with meters on our farmers. Our floodplain, our Gila floodplain, the insurance is forced on you without a local input of voters or elected officials. This kind of jumps around, ranch. I'll get to it. Wolf Reintroduction Program. The wolves have taken a priority over private property rights. The large predators, and I'm talking about bears and lions too. The large predators have taken livestock, pets, and have a severe psychological effect on individuals in the community. This is another forced program the property rights didn't consent to. Ranchers are being required to graze cattle for a partial year at great expense to the ranchers. Some allotments have been greatly reduced and eliminated in the past few years, and one case in point is the Stacy Ranch, and went from 90 head to 15 head. That's not even a good hobby when all the expenses that go to it. My personal part, I own a ranch too that's on the Forest Service. 6.5 miles of the creek with my water rights on it is no longer available to me. We went from 130 head to 58 head some 40 years ago, even before this, but I'm dealing with these. We had 5,000 to 6,000 head of cattle in the northern part of the county at one time. Now we're down to about 1,000 to 1,500 head. These allotments are being cut due to the environmental assessments and acts of Congress that have been misinterpreted and misapplied that weaken the private property rights. Endangered species and other acts of Congress have weakened property rights and the full use of their property. Conservation non-government organizations are attempting to contract conservation easements with local farmers and ranchers. They have been successful in some areas along the Gila River and the San Francisco River. Conservation easements seriously restrict property use and the fullest enjoyment to the owner. Well, a couple of them we got is the Gila Watershed Partnership and Friends of the Frisco. And let me make it clear, a lot of these people are my locals. They mean well. They're good people. I don't think that some of their actions are conducive to property rights, and I'd like to educate people on that. And another thing I want to mention at this time is this is these people's property, and they can do as they please. What I want to do is educate them a little bit better so that they can make an informed decision before they take this money, grant, loan, whatever it is, and put that into a conservation easement. And right now, too, I'd like to say I love clean water and I love clean air. I like to jump off my horse at Eagle Creek and get a drink of water right out of it. It's a good thing. But these objectives of these acts, they've been achieved. We have the cleanest air and the cleanest water in the last 30 years than we've ever had. And we don't need to take more property rights or any over these issues. Non-government organizations, the Sierra Club and the Defenders of Wildlife and those kind of people, they get you a grant or loan and you agree to a conservation easement and put your property rights into the NGO's control. And I don't think that's good for the rest of us. Like I say, it's their property. I guess you can do what you want. It's really not too good. Our planning and zoning, in Greeley County. I've looked at it, and as far as I can tell, it's pretty good. But luckily, Greeley County is not associated with the American Planning Association, and I hope to keep it that way. We will not participate with an association that has its founding in the United Nations and had millions donated to start up by Al Gore. Greeley County wants no part of this smart growth agenda, and I hope you consider this stance in other counties as well as the state of Arizona. The timber industry here, logging is not done very little in Greeley County because of endangered species, wild and scenic rivers, wilderness act, and FLIPMA. If you read FLIPMA real good, in section 7 it says that it's supposed to protect the pre-existing rights from 76 back, and they just kind of overlook that part most of the time. And you can take that forest, you can log it, graze it, keep it healthy, use it for recreation, or it's going to burn down and the beetles are going to get it. And I'd rather use it. I don't know about you. Another part we have here that's restricting everything is road closures. Road closures, RS 2477 roads, just right-of-ways are being closed by the Department of Interior. These closures are not in line with the intent of multiple use principles. This is all being forced through environmental conservation, sustainable development principles that weaken our property rights. When an area becomes roadless, it triggers a wilderness study which could ultimately become a wilderness area that is almost totally non-use. Without right-of-ways, all the natural resources become off limits and unusable. These agencies doing this with no jurisdiction, no police powers, and no congressional authority, which has an extremely adverse effect on the economic and social fabric of Greeley County, the state of Arizona, and the nation. One of the roads that really strikes me, that really gets me, is up the river from Clifton, is the San Francisco River. And every time I mention it to anybody, I'm saying, well, we'll get sued. You know, this road is on our list of county roads, but we're unable to maintain it because of the endangered species, maybe the spike dice, the loach minnow, you name it. Could probably go on and on about which species it is. Motorized travel restrictions depress logging, hold back recreation, and such as hunting, fishing, bird watching, bird watching and various activities within our forest for the people. These recreational activities are second largest in the economy next to mining and contributes to Greeley County. And I have a report, and this is an old report. It's 2001, but I'm sure it's grown a lot. Fishing and hunters contribute $2,579,000 to our local economy. OHV expenditures, not to go down to everything it says, $11,745,000. You know, that's a big thing in our county when mining's a big thing. The Washington Post article by Tom Kenworthy, and this is 1998. It's pretty old, I know that, but although copper mining dominates the economy of Greeley County, home to the ranchers' federal timber sales, receipts were also an important revenue source until the Mexican spotted owl crisis, which slashed receipts from an average of about $600,000 a year to just $67,000 2 years ago. A new house and sales tax took up the shortfall. I wasn't even involved then. I was going crazy then. But FMI is our mine up there is about 20% of the state economy. If these things go through, you know, we're going to be losing a lot. That mine is a good part of this whole state. Everybody here in this room is going to be affected if Freeport was to go down. We have a $1.6 billion construction going on as we speak right now that's going to help everybody out. They buy stuff from all over this nation. We have to deal with MSHA. They come in. I worked in the mine for 36 years. and I was the electrician leading them around. When they come into our mine, we're scared to death, because they can literally shut that mine down, and it's not right. Another thing that the Migratory Bird Act, they have cannons down there. They try to keep them birds off. They do everything they can. No telling how many people they've employed tried to keep them birds off. One of them lands in that Tating's pond, and the rumor has it, it's thousands. It's rumored it's $30,000 a bird. Now, in a good times like right now, that doesn't mean much when you're making billions of dollars, but it could be the difference of a whole 100 of them was to land there at $30,000 a piece. That could shut the mine down on bad times. But that's about it. I got to say that, except this conclusion. As you can see, Agenda 21 in Environmental Acts of Congress has its tentacles deep in Greeley County. It is a web of deceit and illusion disguised as environmentalism, forest management, water conservation, plan development, and other names. But what is it really? It is control of money and power. They want what we have. As an elected supervisor of Greeley County, I cannot and will not support any Agenda 21 policies. The people of Greeley County want their freedom, property rights, less intrusive regulation, and we certainly don't want Agenda 21 in our education system. We care about the environment and our community and have taken good care of it for 200 years. In the last 25 years, the federal government and the United Nations regulations and agendas have undermined the free market and liberty-based principles contained in the Constitution that we all took an oath to uphold. One of the biggest tools used by the environmentalists is NGOs and the federal government. It's the federal government's threats of litigation. Because of these frivolous, in most cases fraudulent threats, people are unable to avail themselves of their property rights, causing economic and social decay in Greeley County. If you define the definition of terrorism, one could conclude that this form of threat on the people is nothing short of terrorism itself. The definition of terrorism, according to 20 CFR section .85, is the unlawful use of force and violence against persons or property to intimidate or cohere a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. Nothing in the Constitution authorizes the federal government to regulate private property. Nothing in the U.S. Constitution authorizes the federal government to manage wildlife, prescribe land use regulations within the various states of the Union. By what authority then has the federal government constructed to expand bureaucracy that now forces wolves, panthers, bears on states and communities that don't want them, or levies fines and jails people who dare dig a ditch or dump a load of sand on their own private property? How did we get here? It's simple. It's called Agenda 21. We have allowed our authority to be undermined and our money and resources to be used against us. We send the federal government our money and they give it to the non-government organizations to enforce their agenda back on us through grants and subsidies. This is not sustainable development. It is unsustainable. We must end Agenda 21 and restore our sovereignty here in Arizona.
Because this is a regular hearing, and so we need to have decorum in order, please. We have, Mr. Cabell, may I interrupt for just a moment? We have some new people who came, and they're on the committee, and if you would like to introduce yourself. And
Sure. Thank you, Senator Burgess. Representative Warren Peterson, Legislative District 12.
Thank you, Ms. Chairwoman. Kelly Townsend, Representative 16, or excuse me, District 16, State Representative.
Oh, Madam Chair, I wanted to ask some questions. It's really great to see you again, Supervisor. I said something to you March 21st. I just thought I'd like to echo it and remind you, and I'm sure there's no reminding necessary, but I also said this to all the supervisors, that you need to tell your sheriffs that if the Forest Service comes in or any federal government entity comes in and starts closing your roads, the roads that are vital to your counties, You tell your sheriff to get out there with a bolt cutter and open those roads back up. And if the local federal individual gives you any trouble, you have your sheriff revoke their firearm carrying capacity. And if they still give you any trouble, you give them my phone number and you have them call me. So, you said nothing, actually this dovetails perfectly because this is what I wanted to ask Supervisor Allen, but you said nothing in the Constitution. You said that a number of times. Nothing in the Constitution provides them with the ability to do this, provides them the ability to do that. I think you're referring to our enumerated powers, and could you remind me and the audience what your understanding of the 10th Amendment is?
Nullification.
Well, as I spoke there, they don't have any police powers, and I don't believe the federal government can show you anywhere, and you can ask them any time, and the police powers is reserved to the states and the people.
And the sheriff.
And nothing, if there's anything in that Constitution that isn't defined, isn't given to the federal government, it's reserved for who?
States and the people.
Very good, I appreciate that. Now, just real quickly, as a rancher, sure appreciate what you're doing. Boy, you can't ask for a harder job. But as a rancher, can you talk about a moment, some of the positive impacts about having animals out out in the land, and also some of the positive impacts that you and your fellow farmers are committed to doing as far as maintaining the land and repairing and maintaining watershed?
Well, if you heard me speak, I'm off the creek, the Eagle Creek, for 6.5 miles. Now it's grown up to the point where you can't even hardly go through it. And we spoke earlier about these trees. They take up a lot of water. This water from this creek goes directly to our mine. And I really do like mining, y'all. It's a good thing, but by putting the cattle on there, not only on the creeks in the bottom, they're not grown up, they don't take up water, it takes care of the watershed better. You get the salt cedar rate down by them. The farmers are continually trying to use their water in a better way because they have meters on them, and they're trying to use their best methods to farm and keep going. And we are the best stewards of the land. And let me remind everybody that in the beginning of this state, the farmers and the ranchers were the first ones to show up here. And, you know, we deserve a little respect.
And you know, I do apologize because I had realized a few minutes ago that I personally have not said thank you to everybody out in the audience for being here today, for taking up your time. I truly appreciate such a great turnout, and that you're passionate and that you love our country and our state, and keep it up. I want to end with one last thing. You mentioned there's an individual in the back here that represents the Sierra Club. You mentioned the Sierra Club, and I just wanted to mention something, and thank you for being here. I appreciate that, Sandy. But something that a lot of people don't know. Well, so one thing that most of you probably know is the Sierra Club, just like our president, boy, they really hate coal. They hate this natural resource that, as far as I'm concerned, God gave to us. But the other thing that a lot of people don't know, and I think the senator here would, should be the first one to remind me of this fact, is the Sierra Club gets a lot of money from natural gas companies. And so what an interesting coincidence. They hate coal and they're getting funding from natural gas. It boggles my mind. Thank you very much. I do appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this is just a short one, but I'll preface it with that notion that he who pays the bills gets to make the rules. And so I would like to know, how dependent are you in your county on federal dollars? And are you making efforts to wean yourself from that and become sustainable without the federal government?
Ma'am, I've been there about 3 months. I can't speak to you about the specifics about that. I wish I could. And I'm really not prepared. We take a lot of like your PELT money and your HERF money and all that from your roads. And if we don't get it, we're done. because our severance tax from our mine, which is huge, goes directly to the state, and it's divided among the counties, you know, by capita. So I guess the biggest county gets the biggest share. But us being unable to use our natural resources, create jobs, and use our own land, that's why we're so dependent on this. And if you go to most Greeley County cattle growers and everybody there to survive, farmers, ranchers, it gets loans, grants to enhance their property so that they can stay in business. And other than myself, I try not to take any. We did the milk program some years ago, but to my knowledge, that's the only one. But it's like you say, he who pays the bills gets to make the rules. So if you take a bunch of loans and grants, you're contracting to them, and you need to do what they say, because that's what you agreed to.
Thank you, and Madam Chair, I just want to recommend all of our states to keep this in mind as the foundation as we move forward. If we were going to try and fight this issue, we can do nothing until we wean ourselves. And so I know there's certain mandates, but going forward, and I said on the floor, and I'll say it again today, the United States is a sovereign nation, and Arizona is a sovereign state. And in order to exert that, we need to not be taking dollars whenever possible from the federal government. So we have to remove that.
Thank you so much for saying that.
Yes.
Madam Chair, just a reminder, and I think I'm with several others, we have 11:30s. You know,
We will move right along.
you have several other witnesses, and I know I've been as guilty as anybody up here, but so that we make sure we hear from them.
To that point, we all have to remember that ultimately the taxpayers are the ones who pay the bills. They pay the federal bills, they pay the state bills, they pay the local bills. So we always have to keep the taxpayer at the heart of what we're doing and be good stewards of the taxpayers' money.
And we all raised our hand and swore to protect the citizens of the state of Arizona and our nation under the Constitution of the United States of America, which is the supreme power of the land. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much for letting me speak. I appreciate it a lot.
And I just wanted to mention that many of our members have other meetings, so they're kind of in and out. Mr. Lewis from the Central Arizona Water Project.
Thank you.
Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Mark Lewis. I am the elected director from Maricopa County. My comments are my own and not of the CAP or SRP water boards. I just want to set the table for what it is we do. I collect $260 million from 80% of the population of the state of Arizona to pump renewable water supplies off the river and into the state for the farms and the cities. And that's my job, is to supervise the staff and set the policy. And what that means is I spend the majority of my time fighting with or suing the EPA or some other form of federal agency. And we spend all of our policy time doing that. And like you, we're challenged by the economics of the regulation and people on this side and people on that side. And it's really difficult to make those kinds of policy decisions with the information we have and the public comment we have on both sides. And that truly is our challenge, because we all take testimony, we have staff and executive branch folks to rely on. I personally have 5,500 engineers that go through this stuff and brief us on this stuff. And it's a challenge to find the middle ground for us. And my challenge today is, in the next 8 months, I'm going to make a $1.1 to $2.6 billion decision on the future of your water and power. And let me just kind of give you the magnitude. $1.1 to $2.6 billion decision for 80% of the population for water and power for farms and cities. And that is a big burden to place on our board today. And it's largely driven by the EPA's desire to regulate the coal-fired power plants that we rely upon to pump our renewable water supplies across the state. And it supplies energy and mining jobs and jobs for the Navajo Nation, and we also have wrapped within all of this the Indian water rights settlements that we did throughout the state to settle the Indian water rights settlement. And so if you just think about it geographically, the Navajo Nation and the Hopi people are mining coal up in northern Arizona and northern New Mexico to power the power plant that pumps the water all the way down to Green Valley. And that is how our renewable water supply system works. And if you believe in a renewable water supply system, and we have to have renewable water supplies for the next 100 years, you kind of get a grasp of the magnitude of how the water and the power connect together. Well, the state implementation plan to comply with the EPA regulations basically gave us 67 years to comply with the plan. And with that kind of big decision in front of me, 67 years over, $2 billion is not a big deal. The Obama administration and the EPA, with their war on coal, have tightened that decision point down to 6 years. And that is going to be a dramatic impact on everybody. And most importantly for me, from my perspective, from the water community's perspective, we want to create as many renewable water users as we possibly can, given our constraints. And if you want to put your renewable water supply program in jeopardy in a desert state like Arizona, then this is how to set the table, because they have just created a huge crisis for us. And my challenge today is essentially the policy issues surrounding timing of the regulations and the cost of the regulations. And just to jump to the punchline, the solution, I think, is that we need to create a department of checking the EPA's math. And it needs to be, I'm serious. It needs to be, it would have some smart folks like this gentleman here on it.
And we include crayons.
Yeah. And I'm quite serious about that, because the challenges that we face, you have utilities on one side, you have tribes on the other, you have the Sierra Club's agenda, you have the EPA's agenda, you have the farmers' agenda. I have a lot of agendas coming at me, and I'm just not able to deal in a short period of time with all the information that's coming at us. And everybody has their own little political spin, and it's up to us when we take testimony and try to figure out what's going on. That is our challenge, truly, as a public policy maker. And we are unable and ill-equipped to deal with this today. Within the last 48 hours, the state of Nevada has agreed with Harry Reid to exit all coal-fired power plant, and that's another 11% of the persons who own the Navajo generating stations who are now leaving. Wow. And they're switching to solar and natural gas. Oh my God. And this is, we're up to the 40% range, folks. I got to spread that $1.1 billion over the 5 owners, and now we have 3 owners. And so the state of Arizona's liability here went up by almost $150 million in the last 24 hours. And that is a huge burden to place on political subdivisions of the state. And we just don't have the capacity. We don't have the infrastructure and the smart guys in the room to help us make these decisions. And they keep coming at us. And if you look at the timeline that I handed out on the back of my CAP presentation, you can see the past 8 or 10 years and the next couple of years of regulations that we're dealing with. We've been through a lot of them. Not all of them are on here. The regional haze issues, I added on here because I just don't have the staff to even keep up with it. I have to do it myself. And I mean, we're going to hit crisis point here in the next 6 months. And the regional haze issue is the topic du jour. And I know that Senator Allen and I and Senator Griffins have been encouraging testimony in EPA hearings over the state for the last 12 months or so. But this is just coming at us, and it's going to have no benefit. If we spend $1.1 billion on the Navajo generating station to put a catalytic converter on it, it will have no human perceptible benefit for that improvement. Now, there will be some NOx reduction, and there'll be health benefits, and there's all those other things that I support. Like I said, there's a timing issue. If I need to spread this out over a little more time, I'm going to be able to recoup my costs from the ratepayers, and I'm going to be able to minimize rate shock on the farmers and my other Indian tribes who are customers. But the challenge is the timing. So if I do all this, if I spend $1 billion, if I raise water rates, if taxes increase off the board, the question is, in 5 years after we do all this, and we put a $1.1 billion catalytic converter on the power station, will that be the only rule and only improvement that I'm going to need if I'm going to finance this on 20 or 25-year bonds over the next 20 years? In other words, why should I spend $1.1 billion if I have no certainty on the timing of the regulations? And the answer is nobody has the answer, and the answer is looking less and less sure today. The Navajo Generating Station, according to ASU, supplies $18 billion in economic impact to the tribes and the northern Arizona. If our decision time, which is the next 6 months, continues to go south, where the EPA is making regulations and the stakeholders are leaving, like Nevada and California, it's looking less and less like we're going to be able to save the Navajo Generating Station and the coal jobs. And in that case, you know, Page would be essentially the Walking Dead. Yeah. Because there will be no economic development at all. So go ahead.
Director, doesn't that put us in violation of the legal agreement we have on the CAP? Doesn't it violate the CAP contract? Because we will not be using that plant to offset the cost of moving the water, which is set down in law. So actually it will put us in violation of other laws if we actually close that plant as a state.
Don't worry about that.
Senator Burgess,
John.
The short answer is yes. We supply $50 million a year in Indian water rights settlement payments as a matter of law. This is not only a state act, it's a congressional act. And so what the Gila River Indian communities, who are one of the larger beneficiaries of that water settlement agreement and those payments, they basically said, we're reneging on our deal, we're not settling your water rights claims. You reneged on our financial portion of the deal, so we're reinstating our lawsuit against all the water right holders in the Gila River Basin to collect our water rights. And so, like I said, you know, we spend the bulk of our policy time arguing with or fighting with the federal government or suing them. And therein lies the challenge and the solution, how you guys can help us. Within the notion that we need to do two things immediately. Number one, we need a SCR this session to save the Navajo Generating Station, like Senator Burgess and Senator Griffins have been working on for the other 3 coal-fired power plants, and we need that like next week. The other thing is we need to have a serious discussion. We need to develop a white paper and a striker virtually immediately to create something like checking the EPA's math within JLBC. And we need that department to sort of organize all these little efforts that are going on with all these various agencies and consolidate that information system into a couple of staff members so that they can give us good information on the rates and the impacts and the health costs and the trade-offs that we got to make in a very short period of time. And that organizations exist within SRP and CAP and TEP and all these other utilities and the NGOs and the environmental and all these things, but they don't really come together in a cohesive manner, and we don't really have any outreach to reach out to the state of Texas and the state of Utah and the state of Colorado and some of these other states that are being impacted by the regulations that are accelerating the closure of the coal-fired power plants. And, you know, this is Arizona. We have basically, we have no oil, no gas, we have no choice. We have to use nuclear, we have to use solar, we have to use coal. It's an all-of-the-above solution. What we don't have is oil and gas. That's just not our natural resource. So we have to go with what we have. And for that sort of policy direction, we need some backup from you guys.
Well, Mark, I think we're going to have to cut testimony a little bit shorter.
That's fine.
apologize.
No problem.
Thank you very much, Director, for being here. And I apologize to everyone. I need to run to another hearing right now. But first off, I truly appreciate the work that you're doing. And I can't agree with you more as far as how devastating closing NGS would be. Goodness, if nothing else, we've been taught over the years that we haven't treated our Native American people well. And here's a situation where Washington is creating that will decimate families on the reservation, absolutely decimate them, take high-paying jobs, preferential hiring practices, and just throw it out the window. And these families that are really going to be in a bad shape. But I've toured Navajo Generating. Amazing what they've done. Amazing what all of our plants have done as far as reducing pollutants. And I can't highly commend them more. So we have a fight on our hands, and everybody in the audience, we have a fight on our hands, because if Navajo Generating and some of our other stations are taken offline due to a thuggish federal government, we're going to see ripple effects all over the state. Both our water prices, our power prices, it's going to be devastating for Arizona. So this is, if you ever saw a line in the sand, this is one, and we need to come together, and we need to fight back and push back, and we need to, elections have consequences, and wow, did we blow it as a nation in our last presidential election. So God bless you, and keep up the good fight. And I'm going to give you my card. If there's anything I can do providing testimony, if you want to contact me, anything I can help with, please reach out to me.
To that point, if you would like to run the Department of Checking the EPA's math, we would be happily accept your resume.
I will work with you on that challenge.
Thank you.
Okay, and our next presenter is going to be Mr. Wes Harris. Thank you, Wes.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, in the sake of time, I will skip around on my presentation to hit on the high points. If there's a Agenda 21, Common Core, and the 10th Amendment, these are topics all linked to the detriment of our state sovereignty. If there's a bedrock principle upon which our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, the nation, it is the government is empowered by the consent of the governed. There are people who believe that this method of public policy is obsolete. The President's Council on Sustainable Development is just one, and I'll quote from their preamble. We need a collaborative decision process that leads to better decisions, more rapid changes, more sensible use of human, natural, and financial resources to achieve our goals. Then there are people who believe that there is a more important principle around which society should be organized. The then President Al Gore said, we must make the rescue of the environment the central organized principle for civilization. Adopting a central organized principle, one agreed to voluntarily, and that I don't understand, means embarking on an all-out effort to use every policy and program, every law and institution, every treaty and alliance, every tactic and every strategy, every plan of course of action, to use, in short, every means to halt the destruction of the environment, to preserve our natural ecological system. Minor shifts in policy, marginal adjustments, and ongoing programs moderate improvements in the law, regulations, rhetoric offer in lieu of genuine change. These are all forms of appeasement and designed for the safety of the public and not desired. Were these initiatives raised from the people who are governed, expressed through their elected officials, defined and debated in public and decided by public vote by the appropriate government bodies, then I wouldn't have a problem with these things. But that's not the case. These initiatives arise from people who have ideas that come from the international community, crafted into policy documents by the United Nations, and presented to the world through the United Nations conferences, particularly the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. The Congress of the United States, elected by those who are governed, has not enacted legislation that defines or authorizes the national policy of sustainable development. No state legislature has enacted legislation that defines or authorizes a policy of sustainable development. Nevertheless, these policies have been conceived by the international community, have been implemented without our control. Let's take a look at Agenda 21. Agenda 21 compile detailed land capability inventories to guide sustainable land resource allocation, management, and use by the national and local levels. That's a chapter 10. Global biodiversity assessment include methods that limit the use of land resources through zoning schemes, use incentives, tax policies to foster particular land use practices, create and enforce tenure arrangements, and establish easements that seek to establish landscape characteristics favorable to biodiversity. Then Sustainable America, which is highlighted in Chapter 5. Government agencies, conservative groups, and the private sector should expand the use of ecosystem approaches to use collaborative partnerships for sustaining ecosystems and biodiversity. Develop indicators which can be used to monitor the status of ecosystems for restoring damaged ecosystems. I find it rather incredible that America is singled out, but that is what Agenda is all about, is to push America down and bring everybody else. The influence of Agenda 21 and other United Nations treaties and policy documents is very clear in the implementation of land use policies in rural America. The United Nations policy on land use was adopted in 1976 by the UN Conference on Human Settlements, Habitat 1 is what it's known as. The preamble says this: land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset controlled by individuals and subject to the pleasures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation of concentrated wealth, and therefore contributes to social injustice.
God.
Public control of the land is therefore indispensable. Twice in the 70s, minority interests in Congress have tried to pass federal land use planning acts. They have both failed. Nevertheless, the administration rules and regulations has continued to pursue this policy of public control over land use. The UN's policy on public control of land use is not limited to rural lands. Agenda 21 speaks to very profusely about the control land of human behavior in urban areas. The UN Conference on Human Settlements, Habitat 2, held in Istanbul in 1996, was devoted exclusively to the sustainable communities. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, another unconstitutional organization of the federal government, HUD, was asked by the UN to prepare a report on the United States' progress towards achieving sustainable communities described in Agenda 21. They issued a 26-page report, and it began, Andrew Ashton was the head. It says, one choice is to go as we go, or do as we do, without regard for the grave cumulative changes that have undermined the earth as humanity's cornucopia, our breadbasket, our source of health, vitality, and pleasure, and a hope of our future. This, we are told by science, is unsustainable choice. The other choice is to create a deliberate transition to sustainability. That is, to design it. And for the definition, design is intended for a definite purpose. To go as we go, to do as we do, describes an individual freedom that arises from the government that is empowered by those that are governed. The HUD, which is operated by a non-elected individual, unaccountable to those that are governed. The EPA falls in that same class. Another objective is to create sustainable neighborhoods, support residents in creation of self-sufficient neighborhoods. HUD's vision of sustainable community and the President Council on Sustainable Development provide incentives for regional collaboration on issues such as transportation. We have one right here, called the Metro. Land use, transcend political jurisdictions, that's regionalization. Develop design tools which include model building codes, zoning ordinances, permit approval, process for residential and community building, use of recycled and recyclable building materials, use of native plants to reduce fertilizers, pesticides, and water. Agenda 21 calls for adopting and applying urban management guidelines in the areas of land management, urban development, local strategies for integrating decisions on land use, land management to improve social, economic, and environmental quality of human settlements. Countries should adopt and monitor the guidelines adopted by the United Nations Humanity Settlement Habitat. To the extent to which Agenda 21 and the President's Council on Sustainable Development has influenced public policy in America is truly astounding. Since there has been no congressional debate, there has been no definition of sustainable development or the authority for its implementation. Yet the governments continue to carry out exposure to health assessments and population residents near controlled hazard waste areas and so on. Other areas include race, different summits, safe places for kids, employment commitments, education, downtown revitalization. Go to Phoenix, you'll see that. Regional parks and greenway systems, new industries, land trusts, minority and women-owned businesses. In other words, Agenda 21 is not only telling us what to do, it's picking the winners and losers as well. Agenda 21 is being implemented through local and state applications in the name of the environment and sponsored by the UN implementation arm, which is ICLEI, the International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives. A Bonn, Germany-based organization in contracts with local government, and many of our cities in this state are members of ICLEI, or have been, including the city of Phoenix and the county of Maricopa, and with local governments to serve as consultants for implementation of Agenda 21 objectives. Common Core, in 2 of the 40 chapters of publication of Agenda 21, the United Nations lays out the goals and objectives for the installation of a global standard for education. These have manifested themselves in the creation of what the U.S. standards call Common Core. Make no mistake, these are not Arizona standards, nor are they U.S. standards. They were developed, supposedly developed by the National Governors Association, a private organization, but they and we were duped and into adopting these standards through subversion, intimidation, and bribery. Bribery through grants based on No Child Left Behind, waiver in exchange for Race to the Top funds with the commitment that we would implement Common Core. These standards were developed behind closed doors by hand-picked educational elites with no empirical evidence, no testing, no public input, nothing. Agenda 21 and Common Core have already infiltrated our schools of higher learning using the code word sustainability, a word that did not exist prior to the implementation of the President's Council on Sustainability. Let me read to you an excerpt from a current ASU accounting book.
Russ, could you kind of move it along? Some of our members are having to leave at 11.
Okay. Well, I'm an accountant, a lifetime accountant, educated and practiced accounting at a very high level. A cost, volume, profit analysis is a fundamental cost accounting type of process. But yet, in this textbook, they say sustainable initiatives have the significant bearing on the cost information used by CVP analysis. And it goes on to describe Coca-Cola's endeavors to control the cost of its products, changing the bottles, using different plastics, and all of that, all in the name of sustainability. And I submit to you that it has nothing whatever to do with sustainability. It has to do with cost accounting endeavors that are done on every product line in every major corporation in this country if you're going to compete. ASU also has a strategic plan for sustainable practices and operations online, and I want to read you this one quote. Within a generation, sustainability will be a word with the same transformational potential as liberty, equality, and justice. That is ASU's President Michael Crow. I can go on and read a whole bunch of that, but since we're running out of time, I won't. I want to talk a little bit about the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment, a look back in history since the adoption of the 17th Amendment, which removed control over the U.S. Senate by this body. We have seen unconstitutional expansion of the federal government beyond our wildest dreams. And without, and I emphasize that, without this legislature standing up and objecting. And I said, the states have forgotten that they created the federal government, limiting its powers to define in Article 1, Section 8, which implication was rendered expressed in the 10th Amendment's assertion that the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively. That's right. Within the borders of Arizona, we are, the people are complete and total sovereignty. It is up to us to insist that our elected representatives stand up and resist the federal government. Draw that line in the sand that was mentioned. I'd like to read just a couple of quotes. Thomas Jefferson's Kentucky Resolution claimed that the U.S. Constitution was a compact among several states whereby the states delegated certain limited powers to the U.S. government. Any undelegated power exercised by the United States government is thus void. The EPA is not constitutional. Anything that it does is void. Jefferson counsels to the states to be vigilant against the violation of the Constitution and not hesitate to strike down unconstitutional measures by Congress or the President. He writes, free government is founded in jealousy and not in confidence, and therefore urges that no more be heard of confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief by the chains of the Constitution. In other words, the states should not trust federal officials with unconstitutional power simply because that particular federal official might be trusted to use those powers benevolently. Mm-hmm. And I'll leave you with these words. If money is wanted by rulers who have in any manner oppressed the people, they may retain it until their grievances are redressed, and thus peaceably procure relief without trusting to despised petitions or disturbing the public tranquility. This is an act of Congress in 1774, unanimous act of Continental Congress. And then there's the privilege of giving or withholding our money. We are a contributing state, not a borrowing state. Our money is an important barrier against undue exertion of the prerogative which is left altogether without control, may be exercised to our great oppression, and all history shows how efficacious its intercession for redress of grievances and establishments of rights, and how improvident would be the surrender of so powerful a mediator. Thomas Jefferson, 1775, replied to Lord North. And finally, in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by the repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may be defined as a tyrant is thus unfit to be a ruler of the free people. That's the 1776 Declaration of Independence. To allow Agenda 21 in the local plan to continue, it will just completely take government empowered by the people who are governed by it effectively and push it into the trash heap of history. As elected representatives, you have to be concerned about this and these visions or plans, and they cannot go forward without we the people and the governed by the governed. Thank you.
I have a question for you. You know, when we had our hearing a few months ago, we heard Senate Bill 1403.
When we heard Senate Bill 1403, it was brought up that Agenda 21 is non-binding. How would you answer that?
How would I'm sorry?
How would you answer that?
Agenda 21 is non-binding simply because there has been no act of Congress and no act of the legislature to bind us to it, to accept that law. The problem is that we have manipulators in NGOs that are implementing this procedure without our approval. We also have sympathetic local governmental agencies. The mayor of the city of Phoenix is a good example. He's an Agenda 21 person. He's firmly committed to sustainability. We have a university that is the largest recipient of grant money, and this body has a fiduciary responsibility to start putting their thumb on ASU and U of A and Northern Arizona and start to have them teach what is proper, and since we're paying the bill, and start to control the runaway tuition rates that have far outstripped any inflationary factors.
Yeah.
You haven't done anything on that. And I've written many letters on that particular factor. This legislature is our only defense. And it is this legislature that has to defend our state and the people in it from those powers that would subjugate them. And if you don't do it, we are lost, because the federal government is completely broken.
Wes, you have some dinner that has to go.
I'm done.
Representative Peterson.
Madam Chair, thank you for putting this together. And yesterday, one of the biggest reasons I ran for office is because I witnessed in my business one page. I was there when they came out with an earth moving permit. We laughed. We thought it was a joke. They got smarter and called it a dust control permit later on. Started out as $75, one page. Now it's 43 pages, thousands of dollars to implement per home. Literally have grown men quitting the industry because they're scared of fines and penalties. You could have a $10,000 fine on a job you're only making $500 on. So I'm really passionate about the issue of the regulation. As I've dug into the issue of dust control or stormwater prevention pollution plans, there's some nonsensical requirements in there, and I followed it to the end of the road, and it always ends up, well, we don't know why we do this because they said so, we don't know they said so, and as I got to the end, it's the EPA, and we're scared we'll lose federal funding if we don't do these nonsensical things that don't change anything. So yesterday I read the following proclamation on the floor of the House that I'll share with this body, urging the United States House of Representatives to halt further appropriations to the United States Environmental Protection Agency until reasonable regulatory reform is implemented. Whereas, over the last 20 years, the United States Environmental Protection Agency has imposed certain arbitrary regulations that have been destructive to Arizona's economy and well-being. And whereas many of these regulations ignore Arizona's unique climate and have been implemented without the acknowledgement that the best practices required in our arid climate will never yield the same results as those of a humid climate. And whereas the most recent actions of the EPA threaten the future of the agriculture, construction, mining, water, and power industries in the state, as well as the livelihood of thousands of Native Americans. And whereas prominent Republican candidates and elected officials have denounced the EPA for its regulatory overreach and its lack of concern over the resulting economic impacts. And whereas prosperous societies have shown that they protect the environment better than less developed nations. And whereas the Republican Party has incorporated into its platform the policy of reduced regulation, limited government, and support of free markets without compromising the environment. And whereas the Republican Party has control of the United States House of